Okay, I'm going to talk to you guys today about Gurney Norman's Kinfolks, which I'm sure most of you probably have been able to read so far. It's such an accessible read, so easy to get into. The language is so straightforward. The narrative style of the language very much is in the approach of a voice that sounds like someone speaking to you. It sounds like somebody relating a story to you, telling a family story even. And that's an approach that I've never asked Gurney Norman this directly. I would like to still. How much of that approach may have been influenced by one of his professors, the great Irish short story writer Frank O'Connor? Because Frank O'Connor, and if you've ever read I hope you read Frank O'Connor. If you ever read Frank O'Connor, I think you will see some similarities in style, because one of the tenets that Frank O'Connor had about writing stories, was that they should sound as if the narrator is someone speaking to you, is telling the story. Uh, but what's accomplished with that is the opposite of intrusiveness. Very often, you'll warn a writing student, don't let the author, intrude upon the story. Don't let the author get in the way of the story, explaining everything to the reader, making assumptions and interpretations about the characters. We don't want that as readers. We want to be wholly engaged in the story, and the story is its own thing. Uh, so that to me is a literary accomplishment, one of the literary accomplishments of Gurney Norman's story writing, and of Kinfolks, and of other work that he has done. The deceptive simplicity of the language, which is really working at purpose. There's something that is achieved with that style of narrative language that is purposeful, that is meant to happen, and that achieves a closeness between the reader and the story that so many writers struggle to do and simply cannot achieve as much as they try. So that's how I'm going into my reading and what I want to say about Kinfolks. Uh, Kinfolks is a series of short stories. Okay, that's a given. But it's also regarded, the term that's often used for a book like Kinfolks is story cycle. And that's not a new thing. Winesburg, Ohio might be regarded as a short story cycle, and that goes way back. Sherwood Anderson and people who write about Hemingway will say, well, Sherwood Anderson, was an influence on Hemingway. So the idea of the short story cycle is not new. What happens with a short story cycle is that you will have a collection of stories that are each complete, each is a fully realized story in the story form, but taken together, they are interconnected in such a way that something not exactly like a novel, but something approaching a novel is achieved. So you read this book, and they're not stories that are about you know, different themes, different theses, different ideas that are often what you'll see in a collected works of stories by authors. But they are interrelated. These stories work together. And these are arranged in a chronology that follow the lifespan of the narrator, or not the narrator strictly, but of the persona, the central character, the central consciousness of the stories. And that central consciousness is Wilgus Collier. And many of the stories will be about Wilgus Collier directly involved. They'll be about Wilgus Collier. Some of the stories will be about Wilgus Collier talking about or telling a story, relating a story in such a way that he almost seems much more like this removed third-person narrator. So there's a lot of interesting stylistic things that occur through these. Now, I want to talk today about a few of the stories, not all of the stories, but a few of the stories, to really, to give you some ways of thinking about these stories that maybe you have not yet had in your own reading, or maybe you have. I hope, and it's my intent, that you also watch those short films that were made about three of the stories in the text: Fat Monroe, Night Ride, and Maxine. And those are on YouTube, and I provided a link to them in Unit 2. So please do watch those. Not just to help you in your interpretation and your appreciation of these stories, but they're just such good short films. They're short films. They're award-winning short films. Wonderfully done. If this was a face-to-face class, we'd be talking about those quite a bit. But the first story in the text, Fat Monroe. In this story, we see Wilgus as a young man. And he is, at the beginning of the story, in the same way, think about the chapter from River of Earth, where the narrator begins the day on his birthday, goes on a bit of a journey of an adventure, and he learns something through that adventure. And by the end of the chapter, he has changed in some way. That's what happens in Fat Monroe, known as, traditionally in literary conversation, known as a coming-of-age story. Simply, though, that's too limiting, I think, as a concept. Too much of trying to place the writing into a particular interpretive box. In all stories, we see something learned, or not learned, and that's the point. But in Fat Monroe, we begin the story with Wilgus really at a point of innocence. He is almost in an imaginary place. He's just this child, and he's walking along. Now, before I go further with talking about any of these stories, one thing that I really want you guys to keep in mind in looking at these stories is when they were set. So these would have been set between or following World War II, and going up to the 60s, to the late 60s. That's the span of time that these stories follow. Wilgis's father had served in World War II. That's discussed in some of the stories. So Wilgis would have been born sometime after World War II, and that's a time that has to be kept in mind, because there's always this danger in reading literature that has been written in the past, of doing too much interpretation of it through the lens of where we are now. So, and this is always a conversation that comes up in certain of these stories. People will be looking at certain things in the story and regarding those events as if we can apply the same types of cultural, moral interpretation to those events that we have now to those events then. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that very well, but I think I'll get into that a little bit as we go. So in Fat Monroe, we have Wilgis walking home. He has been to town, and he is walking back home. In the film version, wonderful thing that happens in the film version is that it begins with Wilgis actually sitting in a movie, and he's watching this cowboy movie. And as he's walking home, he's sort of acting out scenes from this cowboy movie. So what the film version does is it sort of reinforces this idea of a state of mind for Wilgis, that he is in this sort of a fantasy frame of mind. So what Wilgis is doing is he's walking home, and he's trying to hitch a ride to get home. And this is a time when it would have been perfectly normal, perfectly accepted, safe, absolutely safe for a child to hitch a ride. Maybe it still is. And so these things, Willis is not putting himself in danger. Willis is not doing anything reckless. But Willis is about to go on an adventure. And it's not necessarily a great, epic adventure where he is faced with all these external, difficulties and fights and things like that. But he is about to be challenged, which is, the basic idea of the adventure story is that the hero, Wilgis, will be challenged in some way. So what is Wilgis going to be challenged about? That's the key thing. So he's walking along, he's trying to hitch a ride, and who stops for him is this fat man in a pickup truck. And this happens not to be somebody that Wilgis does not know. He would, normally it'd probably be somebody would pick him up that he knows or his family knows, but Wilgis doesn't know him, or at least he doesn't think he knows him. It seems to be a stranger. Think of that then as a catalyst, this idea, this is something to get the character going, to get the character, the characters, what Wilgis thinks he knows about his world and understands about his world is about to be challenged. And it's going to be challenged in a way that culturally is consistent, particularly with the time of this story, of the elder male teasing the younger, kind of a rite of passage type of thing. So there's that rite of passage, of teasing, of joking around that occurs, but it occurs in Fat Monroe in such a way that Wilgus is challenged down to his core. Okay. In my reading of this, there's all well, to come to the story for the first time, you're probably going to feel that Wilgus is in danger, that there's this implicit menace with the Fat Man. And in our current times, we have been so acculturated to the idea of predator society and serial killers and things like that, that it's kind of hard to shake all that off and take the story just for what is written on the page. So that's always a difficulty. So we have this Fat Man. In the film version, please watch the film version. The Fat Man is played by Ned Beatty, native Kentuckian. Ned Beatty became famous for a film which you may or may not know, a fairly notorious film. It was based on a novel by James Dickey called Deliverance. And I hesitate necessarily to suggest that you watch Deliverance. You probably should. It's I don't know, maybe by today's standard, it's not that shocking. When I watched it, when it was relatively a new film, I was very much bothered by it. So much so that for, maybe, I don't even know how many years, for a really long time, I refused to read James Dickey's novel. And that was to my loss, because when I did read Deliverance, James Dickey's novel, on which the movie was based, I found it to be a much more nuanced and compelling narrative experience than what the movie provided. So I have problems with the movie. A lot of people have problems with the movie for reasons that you will see if you watch the movie. So Ned Beatty then. So I guess now, after I've seen that film, that short film, when I read this, I can't help but picture Ned Beatty. So on page 2 of this, Wilgus is walking along. This old truck comes flying by. It's this old rattletrap pickup, and the driver shouts out at him, "Well, hurry up there, boy!" shouted a big fat man with a cigar between his teeth. "I'm losing air in both front tires, running out of gas, plus an airplane's going to land here any minute now. Come on." So, automatically there's this absurdity in how the fat man addresses Wilgus. There's an airplane about to land here any minute now. The boy was already running, but at the sound of the man's hoarse voice, he ran faster. He knew better than to believe that about the airplane, but he glanced into the sky anyway as he climbed on the running board. It seemed natural, but what's also being established there is that, okay, yeah, what's this stuff that this guy is saying to me? Is it, do I believe it? I know not to believe it necessarily, but the narrator, the character, Wilgus, he's still affected by it. "Take either one of those seats there you want, old timer," the fat man said, shifting gears as the old truck started rolling. "I wouldn't want you to be uncomfortable." There was so much junk on the seat and the floor, the boy barely found room for himself, and that was on the point of a spring sticking through the cotton wadding and imitation leather of the seat. Around him were tools and parts of 2 or 3 old motors, a chainsaw, and a can of gasoline, some steel cable, and a great coil of thick rope on the floor. The boy glanced at the man curiously, then out of the sky again. Finally, he settled back with his feet propped on a toolbox. I love the detail of the interior of the truck. Uh, it's such a good example of a narrative technique by which a character can be shown by the accumulation of objects and around him. We see something of the fat man's life. We see something of his character in the clutter of all of these things, kinds of things that maybe he does for work. Just so much is done so simply, and so concisely, and nothing is explained to us. We're just shown so much. Well, what is it? The man asked. The fat man asked. What's what? Asked Wilgus. Your name, what is it? Puddintain? Wilgus Collier, said the boy. How's that again? Said the man. He cupped his hand to his ear and leaned in Wilgus's direction. This old truck makes so much noise, I don't hear good. Wilgus Collier. The fat man nodded. Monroe Short. That's what I thought you said. But I wonder if that's actually right. I mean, could your name be Short Monroe and you got it confused? Wilgus grinned. My name's Wilgus Collier, he said. Just like that, eh? Monroe Short, and that's all? Wilgus Collier's my name. I don't have a middle name. The fat man shook his head and sucked his teeth. Well, he said, either way, it's a poor out for a name. What I mean, it's not any name you'd go around bragging about. Why don't you change it? Call yourself Monroe or Steppenfetchit or something. Wilgus laughed out loud this time. Oh, I'll just keep it like it is. So, what's continuously what the fat man is doing is, what he's on one level, he's just joking with Wilgus, and here he makes him laugh. But, everything that Wilgus says gets sort of turned in a way, challenged in a way by how the fat man receives and returns it to Wilgus. The fat man shrugged. Well, he said, it's a free country. How about a cigar? Okay, wonderful lines. He reached into a box of cigars next to his leg, took out 3 or 4. He put all but one into his shirt pocket, then held the one out for Wilgus. Wilgus said he didn't smoke. That's all right, said the fat man. Take it home and give it to your mommy. Or sell it to somebody, if nothing else. That's something you ought to learn, Short Collier. Don't never turn down a free cigar. Besides, it would be a kindness to me if you took it. Well, okay, said Wilgus, and he held out his hand. Give me one, then. Looking very solemn and earnest, the man put the good cigar in his shirt pocket with the others, then took the frayed, soggy one out of his mouth and ceremoniously stuck it in Wilgus's hand. The film version handles that scene wonderfully. This little boy, this soggy butt of a cigar in his hand, and what does he do with it? And it's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful moment. So throughout this, then, the fat man, he's questioning Wilgus's identity, what Wilgus thinks he knows of himself, beginning just with his name. Is that really your name? You sure about that? And then he goes, deeper, and begins to question him about, well, his family. Who is he? He says, let's still about the cigar. Yes, sir, he said. I learned a long time ago about not taking stuff that's free. It's like I said to my wives. I got 'em all together one day. But you probably don't want to hear that story. Tell me, Monroe, how many wives you got? 5, 6? Willis said he didn't have any. Ain't but 8, he said, and my name ain't Monroe, neither it's Wilgus. Okay. Now we're seeing a subtle change in how Wilgus is receiving. He's a little annoyed here now. He laughed before. He's trying to figure out how to take the fat man, how to interpret what the fat man is saying to him. he's getting a little bit maybe emotional. The fat man is sort of he's poking at him in such a way that kind of is irritating and more irritating. It increases. There's a kind of a tension that will increase throughout the story. And Wilgus calls him out, says, "You did not. You're teasing. Take this old cigar back. I don't want it." The man slammed on the brakes. Wilgus pitched forward along with most of the books and tools and equipment. He would have hurt himself if he hadn't got his free hand up to catch himself on the dashboard. "Don't want it," the fat man exclaimed. "How come you to take it if you don't want it?" Then there ensues this wonderful little scene where the fat man pretends to be terribly hurt, fakes crying, and Ned Beatty does such a good job of this in the film. "Oh, Lord," the fat man moaned. He wiped his face with the palm of his hand. "Oh, Lordy me, why did I ever pick up this boy? Everything's exaggerated." Looking at Wilgus's lower lip drooping, he said, "You hurt my feelings, boy. Bad boy, you really have." And two big tears welled out of the corners of his eyes and rolled down his puffy cheeks. Wilgus didn't have anything to say. And that goes on. "I didn't go to hurt your feelings," said Wilgus, "but I don't really think that I did." Listen at him," sighed the fat man, "accusing me of telling lies. Oh, Lord above, why did I ever pick up such a boy?" "I didn't call you no liar," said Wilgus. "You're just making all that stuff up." Said the fat man. He sat up a little straighter now. Short Wilgus, I had a suspicion you was going to turn out to be mean. I didn't want to say anything about it, but I could tell 3 or 4 miles ago. I could see it in those eyes of yours. Mean, just plain M-E-A, mean. I don't know what else to do with you but report you." And there's a menace that comes across in the film version of this. The fat man is sort of feigning this anger towards Wilgus that you can pick up here, and it is reinforced strongly in the film version. "Whose boy are you?" "Glenn Collier's." "Glenn Collier's what?" "His boy," said Wilgus. "He's my daddy." Said the fat man. "Seems to me like I've heard of Glenn Collier. Ain't he that fishing worm salesman from over on Leatherwood?" Okay, so he's attacking Wilgus's idea, his concept of his father. Actually, in a way, it would be like it's an insult. Wilgus didn't have anything to say. He refused to even look at the man. Okay, Wilgus is angry now. They were passing familiar places now, within a mile or two of his house, and Wilgus stared out the window, wishing he was already home. If he don't sell fishing worms, what does he do? Talk to me now, Short Wilgus. Let's get all this said while we've got the chance. Daddy loads coal for the Harlow brothers when there's work. And your mommy? How does he treat your mommy? Daddy's real good to us, said Wilgus. Well, that ain't the way I heard it, said the fat man, and he clucked his tongue and shook his head knowingly. What do you mean? Wilgus asked. Somebody told me your daddy drank whiskey, played all his money away on cards, laid out on the weekends, and then when he would come home, that's not so. My daddy's good. Okay, Wilgus is defending his father now. He's been placed in this position, and he's angry. How often does he beat your mommy up? That's kind of a twist on an old sort of a joke. And, these are the sort of little touches that, a reader from right now, might find bothersome in a way that they were not intended, and that these things have to be taken with an understanding of time and context, which is not to say that it would have been common for men to beat their wives. That is not what I want you to interpret, how I want you to interpret what I'm saying. It's just a way of talking. That ain't the way I heard it, said the fat man. I heard he beat on you and was too sorry to work, and that him and your mommy fit one another all the time. They just fit and throw things and wrestled all over the floor, and that she went out with boyfriends and he went out with girlfriends and left you at the house all by yourself without anything to eat and no coal for the stove. Now me, I don't blame you for hating a man like that. If my daddy was ever treated me like that, none of that so, Wilgus cried. I like my mommy and I like my daddy, and that's the last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to tell them on you too if you don't hush. But why, Wilgus? Why do you like them? That's the point. Because I just do, said Wilgus. They're my mommy and my daddy, ain't they? I don't know, said the fat man. Are they? Wonderful questions that are joking on one level, but that are menacing on another. But that element of menace is necessary to bring Wilgus through to the end of the story, and to help him change, to turn, to go deeper into his thinking, to go deeper into his perceptions of the world. Yeah, it's necessary in the story for Wilgus to be challenged in a very essential, deep way. He broke into this violent laughter that the truck started swerving back and forth across the road. Great tears rolled down his puffy cheeks. His eyes seemed to roil back inside his head as he tossed his head, laughing. Oh, me, he groaned. Oh, lordy me, what a boy this is. But gradually the fat man's laughter became a fit of hoarse coughing. He rocked back and forth, clutching the steering wheel with both hands, sucking for air, turning red in the face from the effort. Hit me on the back, boy. Hit me on the back. Hit me on the back. I'm dying. And so what probably you've noticed is that the fat man is orchestrating everything. You know, he is everything he says to Wilgus is with intent. He's trying to get certain responses from Wilgus. He is a catalyst in that. He is trying to get Wilgus to respond in some way. And Wilgus begins to do so. He begins to hit him on the back. This is a wonderful paragraph. Wilgus wanted to hit him. He wanted very much to hit the fat man, hard in the face, on the head. He wanted to pick up one of the heavy wrenches from the floor and hit him hard enough to kill him. That's how angry Wilgus is. He slapped him once on his thick neck. He made a fist and struck him on his enormous shoulder and along the neck. With both hands, he beat the fat man with all his might, pounding him about the neck and back and shoulders. Wilgus was crying now. Whoa, whoa, someone shouted in the truck. Whoa there, Tiger, take it easy. So Wilgus has become so involved in taking retribution on the fat man and beating on him because he's become so angry that he's lost sort of track of everything else. He's just completely into this. And suddenly he's in a place that he didn't necessarily expect to be. Who is it that's saying this, and who is it that's saying, whoa, whoa? It's his father. Wilgus, the voice belonged to Wilgus's father. In a sudden cloud of dust, the truck had veered off the highway onto the narrow dirt lane that led to Wilgus's house. They'd driven right into the yard and stopped at the edge of the coal pile, where his father stood with a bucket in his hand, grinning. The fat man has known all along where to take Wilgus. The fat man has known all along really who Wilgus is. Once he learned his father's name. And the fat man says, "He's a pure God wildcat, that and is," the fat man said as he clambered out of the truck to shake Glen's hand. "You've raised you a tough 'un there now, Glen. I declare you have." Laughing, Wilgus's father glanced into the truck where his son sat wiping his eyes. He was a lanky, thin-muscled man with a miner's cap on and no shirt. The galluses of his faded overalls lay against his bare, pale miner's skin. Wilgus's father looked strange without a shirt on. It was strange to see him in the daytime without coal dust on his face. He was clean and shaved, and he'd got a haircut somewhere that day. His father looked so different that in some ways Wilgus didn't recognize him. The light refracting off the windshield seemed to curve him. It even made his words, his voice, sound curved. Now, this is a very significant paragraph. Remember I said that this is a story in which the narrator is challenged, and what is being challenged is his view of reality, his view of the world as he believes it to be. And what Gurney Norman does here is so deft. Visually, he gets that idea across. Doesn't tell us that Wilgus has come to see things differently. He shows it to us. Wilgus's father doesn't look the same to him now. Well, for one thing, Wilgus is used to the father. Glen gets up before daylight, goes to work in the mines, comes home after daylight. So, what Wilgus sees of him is not necessarily always like this. Strange without a shirt on. It was strange to see him in the daytime without coal dust on his face. So it's not the usual visual that he has. He was clean and shaved, and he got a haircut somewhere that day. His father looked so different that in some ways Wilgus didn't recognize him. Not just because he is physically different, but because that too. But Wilgus has been challenged. Wilgus's view of his father has been challenged. Wilgus's view of himself has been challenged. The light refracting off the windshield seemed to curve him. That's such a wonderful image. What is that an image of? That is an image of how Wilgus's view has been altered, challenged, and changed, even if it's just a little bit. It even made his words, his voice sound curved, changed, different. "By God, don't I know it," Glen said, shaking his head and smiling proudly. "You've got to watch out for that Wilgus. He'll beat your ears off if you ain't careful." "He liked to beat me to pieces," said the fat man. "All I did was allow what a scoundrel you are, and pow, he lit in on me till I thought I was a goner. He's my defender, that boy is," said Glen. And Glen shook his old friend Monroe short by the arm and led him away, talking and laughing about the old days. So the reader, we learn that, look, Wilgus was never in any danger, not in any physical danger. The fat man, he's a friend. He knows Glen. He knows Wilgus's father. And Glen took his old friend Monroe short by the arm and led him away, talking and laughing about the old days. Wilgus sat in the truck, watching them. Then he jumped out and ran across the dusty yard to the house where his mother was. There is no real denouement with this story. There is no real conclusion about what it is that Wilgus has learned necessarily. What there is simply the idea that he has been challenged and in some way deepened. How, it may not even be able to be said. Wilgus doesn't know. And what does Wilgus do? One of the when I'm in communication with students directly and discussing the story, and the conversation will occur. There's a concern. There's a question about whether has Wilgus, how has Wilgus been treated at the end? Has he been comforted in any way? What's the upshot of his father not even like talking to Wilgus directly? Okay, so again, and I've disagreed with people about this, not just students but other teachers of the story. In my reading of this, Wilgus is appreciated by his father. He is appreciated by his father in that his father speaks in a way of praise of him in the presence of another adult. "I, God, don't I know it," Glenn said, shaking his head and smiling proudly. "You've got to watch out for that Wilgus. He'll beat your ears off if you ain't careful." Okay, that's something that Wilgus may not internalize right there, but that's going to stick in his memory. And in my reading of that, and in my experience growing up in pretty much the same exact place as these stories are set, Wilgus is appreciated. But then the wonderful last line, he jumped out and ran across the dusty yard to the house where his mother was. Because why? He needs emotional comfort. Granted, you're not going to get emotional comfort from your father in this age, in Appalachia, maybe not still now, just not part of the culture. But, remarkable story. The next story in line is called The Favor. Now, one of the things about Wilgus throughout this entire book is growth. We see him growing. We see him going from being a young man to an older man, or to a child to a young man, let's say, college-age man. And Wilgus's role in the family is always that of the caretaker. He's the one who feels like he has to look out for the other members of the family, and in so many of these stories, that's what Wilgus actually does. That's established in the first story in Fat Monroe, and it's continued and added to, developed upon in The Favor. And I don't want to read so much of this story as I did with Fat Monroe, but the favor in The Favor, Wilgus's grandfather is kind of at a point of crisis in his life, and he has had this fight with his wife, Wilgus's grandmother, and he has just decided that he is just going to leave. He's going to take what cash he has saved up and leave because he's so mad, he's so angry. And again, this is Wilgus's life view being challenged, and his not just his view of things, but what he understands, the idea of comfort of home and everything being challenged. So so the grandfather and Wilgus have gone off, and they've taken their tools. They're going to go do some fence mending, but the grandfather's dressed up in a different way. He's not just wearing his overalls. He's dressed up in his go-to-town clothes, and he gives Wilgus a big wad of money, and he says, "You have to take this to your grandma." And this he begins telling her. He says, "Tell her." Find this. Page 13. Now give this to her, Wilgus. Tell her to stretch it, because I've got the rest of the cash and gone with it. Oh, now she'll scream and carry on. You might as well expect it, but it's just noise. I've stood it 40 years nearly. You can stand it a minute or two. She's getting the place here. It's got a life of work in it. I reckon it ought to equal the dollars I'm taking. Anyhow, it's hern. I don't care. I don't bear no grudges. Tell her she might. That's her privilege. But all my life, back and forth, pillar to post, tell her. The old man's voice trailed away then, and for a moment he was silent. Don't tell her nothing, he went on. Just give this to her, and don't tell her nothing except I'm gone. And he gave Wilgus the money. So Wilgus has been charged with doing this thing. Still a little boy. And this, of course, causes great conflict with him. And we begin, as was insinuated to us in Fat Monroe, we begin to see the depths of feeling that Wilgus has. Wilgus doesn't always understand what he's feeling. He's not always able to name it. And the author doesn't name it for us, but we see him working on it. It's on page 15. So he is he's unable. He doesn't run directly to the grandmother and give her the money, because intuitively he knows that if he does that, then that's gonna not be, things can't go back to normal. That's going to be the real change. It's not the grandfather going away. It's, if Wilgus gives the grandmother the money, then that's going to make it real. So on 15, lying there, he just kind of lies down, and feeling the rock beneath him, hearing the water flowing past his head, while overhead the leaves of the pawpaw trees brushed and flapped together, Wilgus felt something fresh inside him. Something was trying to occur to him. What was it? He didn't know. It was a feeling, a sense that somehow this was it. Everything he cared about was now at stake, in his hands, up to him. Oh, that's such an enormous burden. He doesn't understand why. He just intuits that this is so. The question was whether or not he was up to it. The glory was that he believed he was. Wilgus was amazed that such a feeling was growing inside him. Suddenly his own mind awed him. He felt so powerful and so wise. All he had to do was simply lie there and it would happen. If he moved, if he stirred in the slightest, his idea would disappear before it had fully formed, and more loss than he could stand would be upon him. It's intuitive. He intuits this. But if he lay still, if for once in his life he could resist his impulse to talk and do, if he could be quiet in this rare moment and give this force inside him room to grow, then all he cared about, all the things and people that he knew, would be delivered safe, and life could then go on and on and on. As long as Grandma doesn't know that Granddad's gone, it hasn't happened yet. So, in the way of a child, of a young person, he begins to distract himself. He has these sort of fantasies that grow in his mind about, okay, he's going to take care of his grandma. He's gonna just live off in the woods, and he's just going to keep watch over his grandma and take care of her and do her chores for her. And he begins to think about how he could just live off on his own, and he starts to decide he's going to make himself this camp, and he begins to play, and he starts with damming up the creek and doing these things, and he's sort of moving rocks around, and he's laying off an area for a garden. And really, he's just playing, but he's playing to a purpose. He's playing, towards a purpose. And as he's doing all of this, suddenly, well, not suddenly, but after a while, he's doing this. He looks up, and his grandfather's returned. Page 19. "What are you doing there, son? Building yourself a town?" The old man's sudden presence took Wilgus's breath away. Trembling, the boy let go of the rock he was lifting and stood up. It was him, all right. It was Grandad Collier, in the flesh, and more him now than ever. The tension that had burdened his voice at noon was gone, and so were his dress-up clothes. It was just his grandfather now, wearing his familiar work clothes and his old hat, walking toward him, crossing the creek on the stones of Wilgus's dam. He's come back. He's changed out of this suit clothes that he had on before into his overalls, and he's just normal, and the tension is gone. He's got over whatever, the argument was that he had had. And the grandfather says, "Well, I noticed you didn't take the money to your grandmother." And Wilgus had went and got the money. He'd hidden it under a stone, and he brought it. And the grandfather, he says, "I'll tell you what," said his grandfather. "Let's call it an even 110. I'd like to give you $10 for a present." So Wilgus says, "I don't want no present." "For wages, then. It looks to me like you've put in a pretty hard day, clearing this ground, moving all this rock around." "Oh," said the boy, "I just been playing." "Well," said the grandfather, "you've played hard, and you've done me a real good favor here." And he put the 10 in the boy's pocket and made him keep it, because he has done the grandfather a real favor. Even if the grandfather had gone away and come back, that his intent to leave, and to the extent that he took it, would have been a hard thing to get past and to reverse. And things are back in a way to being what they were. And they go back home, and there's the grandmother, and here it was again, a feeling, a deep inside trying to occur, an idea that Wilgus would be a long time knowing. That's something I really appreciate about this story and other stories. We don't come to a finality that this is exactly what the protagonist has learned, but we get to the point where it's clear that he has been challenged enough, that something has been put in motion inside of him, and it will be a long time for him to understand it. How true to human nature is that? That is the way people work. That is the way big events work. In your own lives, you think back to things that have happened in your lives, and you reinterpret it through time and experience and the understanding that you gain through life. Night Ride. Okay. Probably my favorite story in this book for many reasons. Personally, it resonates with me, but there's a wonderful kind of complexity with this story as well. And this is sometime later. Okay, so from Fat Monroe to The Favor, Wilgus has not aged that much. He's not gotten that much older. But by Night Ride's time, he is growing, and he is in the first stages of becoming a young man. He is a teenager now. He's older. And this is even more of an adventure for him, even more of a going on a quest and being altered and changed. And everything All the ways in which Wilgus changes and grows are internal, psychological, emotional. So, the premise of the story is that Delmer, who is Wilgus's uncle, he is Glenn's brother, has come to take Wilgus for a drive. Now, we don't know what has happened to Glenn's father. That's not part of the overall narrative of this collection of stories. We learn, that story is not given to us, let's say. But Glenn has died. Glenn has died. We don't learn, one of the things about this collection of stories, we don't learn a lot about the mother, Wilgus's mother. But the situation for Wilgus is that he is living with his grandparents. Delmer has come to take Wilgus on a ride, and the grandmother said, "You watch out for that boy." And Delmer, what could possibly happen? Now, Delmer as a character, he's a little bit like Uncle Jolly in some ways. I mean, he's not the jokester, but he's very happy-go-lucky, out for fun, freewheeling, kind of character. And he's taking Delmer on a journey. And on the surface, it's just a drive, but it's also an initiation, and it's an initiation into the adult world of the time, let's say, of the culture. Well, let's say, for the purpose of the text, he is treating Wilgus not as a child anymore, but as a young man. And so, and Delmer's a little bit of a wild guy, or at least for the time he is. And what consists of being a wild guy for Delmer is drinking and shooting off his pistol. That's about as wild as Delmer gets. So they're driving along, and there's Delmer has a 6-pack of beer in the car. And on page 24, he says, "Open me a beer, Wilgus," said Delmer as he shifted into high gear and reached to tune the radio better. It had been screeching and squawking since Wilgus turned it on. Delmer searched the dial while Wilgus put 2 holes in a beer can with a church key. Once upon a time, beer came in steel cans that did not have pop tops, and you had to have this device that was called a church key to punch holes in it. Okay, look it up online. You'll see what I mean. So Wilgus, he opens him a beer. Mac Wiseman is singing on the radio. Wonder how the old folks are at home. It's a great old country song. And Wilgus handed the beer to his uncle, and Delmer took a deep drink, then handed the can back to Wilgus. They're drinking and driving. Yes, they are. People have trouble with that aspect of the story. Contemporary readers are going to have trouble with that aspect of the story. Yeah, maybe they should. But in the story, it's not a bad thing that Delmer is initiating Wilgus into in the context of the story, and in the context of what is provided to Wilgus in the story. And he's Wilgus was only 13, but he knew about beer. He'd been sipping it from other people's bottles as long as he could remember. And he thought it was fine stuff indeed. So he gets a beer for himself. There he was, cruising along the highway, leaning hard around the curves, heading off with his uncle, with 2 6-packs of beer and Mac Wiseman singing on the radio. If this wasn't the time for him to have his own beer, there would never be one. Wilgus handed Delmer's beer can back, opened one for himself, and settled back into the corner of the suicide seat to drink and watch the world flash by. There's a lot of these kind of terms that are, well, they're dated. They're wonderful, wonderful expressions of suicide seat. And we have this joyful experience of Wilgus and Delmer just driving these curvy country roads. There is, as yet in eastern Kentucky at the time of this novel, there is no Highway 80. There is no one long stretch of road that connects the different towns and communities together. It is all just winding around mountains and up mountains and down mountains. And that is the journey that they go on. The Findlay County line flashed by. Findlay County, by the way, is a fictitious county name that exists only in Gertie Norman's narrative world. But it's maybe in the documentary that I linked you to that has an interview with Gertie Norman, he talks about Findlay County sort of being, if you just sort of carve out a piece of Perry County, Knott County, Letcher County, you've got Findlay County. So it's that area. And they pass by. We see the scenery. We see the way of life that occurs along the roadsides. The way people live. Delmer on 25. Delmer was driving so fast. Every time they hit a sudden dip in the road, Wilgus's stomach rose up toward his heart and thrilled him through and through. They hit one dip that felt so good. Delmer slammed on the brakes, backed up, and took it again even faster. It's joyful what they're doing. So they just the whole story thus far, and it's just this sort of shared exuberance of feeling free and happy. And the beer is not making them happy. The beer is just part of the celebration. This is a celebration of life that Delmer is sharing with Wilgus. On page 26, Delmer laughed and told the boy to hand him another beer. He downed a third of it in one gulp, then told Wilgus, "Get the pistol out." He felt like shooting a while. Wilgus got the heavy .38 out of the glove compartment and handed it to Delmer. Now this is a point that could, particularly given the times that we live in, lead to a very interesting discussion. So we live in a society with all these guns, so many guns, and we hear so much about it almost seems like every week at least there is news of a mass shooting somewhere that speaks to an illness in our contemporary society. And it would be very hard, I think, for a young person particularly to come to this text fresh and not be shocked by this activity, and not to have some very understandable prejudgments about what this man Delmer is like with his .38. But I have a different interpretation of what's going on. So Wilgus got the pistol out. He felt like shooting a while. So he told Wilgus to get the pistol out. He felt like shooting a while. Wilgus got the heavy .38 out of the glove compartment and handed it to Delmer. "Steer this thing," said Delmer, letting go of the wheel. Recklessness there. Wilgus took the wheel as his uncle leaned out the window and began to fire, shooting left-handed. Delmer drilled 2 road signs, then he pointed the gun in the air and fired off the remaining rounds. Redneck activity right down to the bone. I love it. Delmer handed Wilgus the pistol and told him to reload it. And Wilgus knew about guns too. His father had given him a single-shot .22 the year before he died. And Delmer and Delmer's brother Junior let him shoot their pistols from time to time. The last 4th of July, when Junior had come down from Cincinnati for the 3-day weekend, they had all been out behind the barn at the home place, blazing away with their pistols at the salt block on the stump, and Wilgus had blown one whole corner off with his first shot. The 38 was heavy in Wilgus's hands, but he reloaded it smoothly and put it back in the glove compartment. Then he opened himself a second beer and settled back into his corner again. Distinction here in a way of regarding firearms that is generational maybe, but also cultural, not in the terms of Appalachian cultural, but maybe in the terms of rural cultural as opposed to urban cultural. What I see in reading this and interpreting this is not menace associated with them, haphazardly shooting off the pistol, but a kind of happiness, a joyfulness, something that is not evil in the way that probably rightly so much of society has come to regard guns, period. But what happens in this is that Wilgus a memory is conjured for Wilgus. And it's this memory of being with his father, and a memory of family, and of Delmer and Delmer's brother Junior, and family, just a time had together, a time shared together. Okay, next in the next page, they're continuing their drive, and there are all these place names that are given to us, which are now, these are real place names. The only fictitious place name is Findlay County. All these other place names are real. And these are place names that I recognized. And maybe one of the reasons that this story resonates so strongly for me personally is that when I was a young man in eastern Kentucky, I'm from Knott County, there wasn't a whole lot to do, but you get to the magic age of 16 when you can get your driver's license, and maybe you get an old car of some kind. My first car was a 1973 Chevrolet Nova that I bought working at a grocery store, saved money over the summer and bought for $1,000 and drove it for several years. In my first car, and the freedom that goes with that. But there's not much to do except just drive around. So that's what I spent so much of my time when I would have been a little older than Wilgus, just driving around. And all this route that they take, these are the routes that I would have driven. You drive everywhere. We drove all over the place. So I've driven everywhere that Wilgus has driven, Wilgus and Delmer. And we see these people the out working. There were old people mostly walking in the rows, dusting the plants, or digging in the box with holes. One old man was leading a mule up a path toward a log barn. Another man was walking across a swinging bridge, carrying a load of groceries in a box on his shoulder. All the people still working after sundown made Wilgus think about his grandparents. This entire experience, Wilgus is not ever cut off. He feels a little sad. Page 28. Wilgus opened another beer for his uncle. Once they had passed through the town of Heineman and headed out through Car Fork toward Cody over on Route 15, Wilgus opened a third one for himself. And again, it's place names and the route is exact, all these things. And they're continuing, page 29, the leaves flapping and flickering silver in the dark made Wilgus think about it, the home place again, about how far away from it now, about how far he was away from it now, away from his grandma and granddad. He's not that far away in miles. He's, relative, well, I guess relative to the time. You think of it as being far, but he is being taken further in his mind. He's being taken further in his mind. Page 31. He's regarding Delmer. He looked very much like his brother. Delmer looks very much like his brother, Wilgus's father, Glenn. His body was shaped the same, except for his arms, which were thick and powerful looking. Delmer was a lean and wiry man, not as tall as Glenn, but proportioned like him. Now and then Delmer rubbed his hand across his face, lightly massaging the flesh. That was a gesture Wilgus's father had made a lot too. Delmer looked weary and sad and angry now as Wilgus studied him. I've jumped past, I think. Yeah. No, I haven't. It's still to come. So he's thinking about his father. He's thinking about the past. There's this connection being made. So these are good things. Delmer's he's getting a little buzzed. He's continuing to sort of get buzzed. Page 33, Delmer stopped the car in front of a hillside that was on fire. It wasn't really a hillside burning. It was a slag heap, big as a hill, steaming all over, and on fire in 100 different places. Wilgus had seen plenty of slate dumps burning before, but he'd never seen one this big. The great mound of burning slag was the refuse of several decades from one of the biggest industrial mines in Kentucky, and that's a real thing. I don't think there are any slag heaps still burning, but there would have been a time when these would have been common slags. And slag is the waste rock, the waste mineral from the mine that's not going to be taken out by train to be sold. It's just dumped, and by the heat that it's such a flammable substance, it just catches itself on fire and burns. And there are stories of these burning for years and years and years and years. And on 34, so they're standing there looking at the slag heap. After a long time of silent looking, Delmer said, "Me and your dad put some of the slate on this pile." "This pile," said Wilgus. Delmer nodded. He sipped his beer and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and he took a few steps backward and sat down in the weeds by the roadside. Wilgus sat down beside him. "Glenn worked at Blue Diamond 4 years before he was born. Then I come and worked a while. First job for wages I ever had. I didn't stay long. The war come, but the slate we dug went on that very pile yonder. It was on fire then, and there it is, still yet burning. There's something to think about." And Wilgus gets much to think about as he's going. The continuity, the idea that even on this big waste pile, this environmental mess of dumped mine waste, there is something of pride to be had by the men who worked the mines and contributed to that. Wilgus sat there thinking about it. He didn't know what he thought exactly. Again, he doesn't know. It's a feeling he had. as much as it was a thought, but it was powerful all the same. The beer running through his system and the flames and sulfur fumes rising out of the earth on the night air added up to a mystery and a power greater than any Wilgus had ever felt before, because it's a very complex kind of thing that he is trying to get at, that is trying to occur to him. The suggestion of something, and this of coming to. Wilgus will be his whole life trying to figure things out, as most of us are. The beer running through his system, and the flames and sulfur fumes rising out of the earth on the night air added up to a mystery and a power greater than any Wilgus had ever felt before. The boy sat there, fishing around in his mind for some words to attach to his feeling, when suddenly his mind was blown away by the great thunder of Delmer's 38. Blam, 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 and incredible sweet thrills ran up Wilgus's spine into his dizzy, spinning mind. So the beer, the slag heap, the sound of, that almost sounds like Delmer shoots Wilgus, which doesn't happen, of course, but the sound of the gun, all these things are adding up together to help Wilgus's mind and understanding go somewhere. They're kind of these aids to an understanding, to getting to an understanding, to a feeling that he has not had before. Delmer, as he drinks more, becomes kind of melancholy. He ultimately, his character when sober is kind of cheerful and joking around, but when he drinks too much, he becomes kind of somber and sad. He's essentially a sad drunk. "He sure was a good old boy," said Delmer. "He was the best one of us, that's for sure. Thing about Glenn, he was smart. I mean, really smart. I mean, he was just an old dog face in the war, and he mined cold like the rest of us, but Glenn could have been anything he wanted to be if he'd had the chance. Lawyer, doctor, Glenn could have been a college professor if he'd had the chance." Wilgus swigged his beer. Me and him used to work crossword puzzles together. So always, there's always as a theme running through the story, Wilgus being reminded of his father, given something to him by Delmer that is not just let's go get drunk and shoot our pistol. And next, let's see. I did go past a certain point where where Delmer stops to visit his girlfriend, but you'll see that when you've read this. And Wilgus is thinking, and so 37, page 37. They've come to a place just to sort of stop and park and hang out and rest up a little bit. Page 37, they found some music on a late-night Nashville station that was just right for the mood Wilgus and Delmer had established for themselves. The music was one more thing that reminded Wilgus of his grandparents, who were sleeping now back at the home place. Some nights after the old folks had gone to bed, Wilgus would get under the covers with his radio and listen to the distant stations, Cincinnati and Louisville, Chicago and Fort Wayne, and sometimes, when conditions were right, even Del Rio, Texas. But his favorite station was WLAC out of Nashville because of the rhythm and blues they played. Right now in the car, Johnny Ace was singing "Pledging My Love." So there's this kind of expansion of Wilgus's world. Next paragraph. Where were they now? Way off in Perry County somewhere. close up to the Harlan County line. When you got close to Harlan County, you were close to the Virginia line. When you were in Virginia, you were in a state that ended at the ocean. Think of that, the Atlantic Ocean, just on beyond those hills there. So Wilkerson's been expanded in his thinking. He's contemplating. Think of the ocean in this very valley here 1,000,000 years ago. Think what they'd said in school. Those very hills used to be underneath the ocean. These very valleys used to be swamps, and in the swamps grew ferns and flowers, and the ferns and flowers turned into coal, and then my daddy dug that coal. Dug it right out of these hills here. Dumped the gob on that very pile there 20 years ago. It was on fire then, and it's on fire now, and maybe it'll burn forever, who knows. So think about a story that sets out with these two hillbilly boys drinking beer, shooting off their pistol, and arriving at a place where Wilgus, the young hillbilly boy, is thinking about the history of the world. They're not going out pillaging and doing these horrible things. A place, this might not be a story that could even be written in contemporary times. I'm not sure about that. And at this point, Delmer is so inebriated, drunk, that he knows, well, he doesn't just know it, he shows it, he can't drive anymore. And so Wilgus then has his chance to do something. 38, towards the bottom of the page. He liked the way the whiskey ran straight to his head and cleared it, focused it, made him see exactly what he should do. What he should do is get behind the wheel and drive the car back home. Wilgus wasn't the best driver in the world, but he had confidence that he could manage it. He'd driven the Ford up and down Trace Fork a few times, and his Uncle Junior usually let him drive his Chevrolet when he came home from Cincinnati. Wilgus could drive. He raked the empty beer cans out onto the roadside, then put the empty pistol back in the glove compartment. He pushed and tugged at Delmer's inert body until he had room to sit behind the wheel. Wilgus forgot to let the handbrake off, and the car wouldn't go at first, but then he remembered the brake, and he let it off, and the car wheeled in a circle on the gravel road and headed back down the valley toward Cornetsville, toward Findlay County, toward Trace Fork and the home place, 50-some miles away. And Wilgus has progressed. Well, interpret as you will. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. It's almost an hour and 22 minutes into this video. I will do another. I may not touch upon each story in the next lecture that I do, because I think I'll leave some of these to your own interpretation. I'll touch upon a couple more at least in my next lecture. And please do watch the film version of the stories. Please do watch the interview with Gurney Norman. Please do read I provided a link to a Wikipedia page about Gurney Norman that discusses his history and his work and his influences. So please do read those things. Those are excellent materials for you, and it doesn't take you a lot of time. And I'll communicate with you again very soon.